Good morning, everyone, wherever you are, to this very early morning session of the Global Landscapes Forum, Restoring Africa's Drylands. This session is called From Farmer-Led Restoration to Carbon-Enhancing Landscapes. It's co-organized by World Agroforestry ICRAF, WWF International, and TMG Research. My name is Jess. I'm head of programs at TMG Research. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and thank you very much for tuning in at these very early hours of the day. At TMG, we do focus in our restoration work on those social innovations that allow communities to become active agents of restoration. And apart from that, we have just recently joined GLF as a charter member, and of course, we're very excited about that. As we are having a rather, let's say, Kenyan session today, I think I would like to use the opportunity to wish all of you a happy Madaraka Day. Hope you celebrated it nicely. For those of you who don't have the pleasure of living in Kenya, Madaraka means power or authority in Swahili, and I hope I'm not misled on this one. And it's the Kenyan Independence Day. And in fact, I would like to host this session in the spirit of the Madaraka Day, not necessarily in sort of to celebrate independence from colonial powers. I think this we will do in other circumstances, but to really emphasize on the importance of self-governance, of farmer-led restoration approaches. And why is that important? I think when we sat together to design this session, we obviously agreed that there is a restoration imperative. The IPCC reports both on land as well as the 1.5-degree report show very clearly that from both an adaptation as well as from a mitigation perspective, landscape restoration is key. Not to mention the necessity to really counter the sixth wave of mass extinction that we are currently facing when it comes to biodiversity. And last but not least, of course, what we are looking at, in not least aggravated through COVID-19, is a hunger crisis in many parts of Africa. So this is the backdrop of our session. We focus on farmer-led restoration because we would like to emphasize that there is a risk that large-scale restoration approaches that are necessary to really counteract these trends that I've just described run the risk of actually alienating those from the land who are there actually making their livelihoods from it, and those who are there to really drive the restoration forward. Now, this is why we focus on farmer-led restoration, and to sort of enlighten us and to kick us all off, I'm very happy and grateful that we have Patricia Kombo with us. Patricia is the founder of the Patri Initiative. You can see her level of commitment because she's still in the car because she got stuck in Nairobi traffic, but still she really wants to share her message with you. Patricia is a young social entrepreneur and climate activist, and her work got recognized by the UNCCD as a land hero. Patricia, over to you. Thank you. And a warm welcome again.
Good morning from wherever you're joining. My name is Patricia. And as you've told, I work with community in restoration. And what we are majorly doing, we realized there was a gap in knowledge sharing whereby, in my community, I realized there was an issue to do with knowledge whereby people were doing things because they found them doing. What we are doing, we are working, first of all, to change their mindset and also share knowledge on how they can restore their farms, and also that they can farm sustainably. And what we are majorly doing in Kenya, in my community, first of all, we started the initiative on community tree nurseries. And the idea was to enlighten communities on the importance of growing trees and also cultivating sustainably. We are working with communities and young people whereby we harvest indigenous trees during dry season, then we put them in nursery, and it is a collaborative approach whereby all members, women, young people join their hands. And from the tree nurseries, we are able now to grow the trees in in forests which have been degraded, and also issuing farmers with some of trees which are suitable for agroforestry. And the reason why we are doing the restoration is because we want them to be part of the journey, because if they are not part of the journey, they will never understand the importance of restoration. And working and growing trees and also having the tree nurseries, we are looking at an approach which is less costly, whereby they do not have to pay any amount so that they can restore. So we set up community nurseries with them, and we use locally available materials that the community has, because land is limited, and telling them to invade in their spaces, at some point they feel it's not right. So we use the all locally available materials like the broken basins, bathtubs to set up the nurseries. And now we are working on kitchen gardens because of the issues to do with land and climate crisis, and with kitchen garden approach, whereby every household has already started the kitchen garden. We farm sustainably, and we use anything that we can restore the land. And also we are working on community farming, whereby instead of applying fertilizers, doing so many things, we are training them on how to do things sustainably. And majorly on community, which is majorly left, is the young people. So we are working with schools in ensuring that they grow appreciating nature, they grow to being leaders who really know the importance of restoration. And we know in Kenya, we are now shifting to introduction of 4K clubs, where young kids will be taught matters to do agriculture. They can be introduced how to farm at tender age, and also the club. And now through working with young people, we are now training them. Once they start practicing agriculture, there are things that they need to do so as to ensure they produce their food maximally, and also they restore nature. And with young kids, it's very crucial, because we are now changing their mindset that agriculture is for old people, agriculture is old-fashioned, and breaking the norm from what they have seen their parents do to now shifting to what is sustainable and what is restoring. And finally, what I can talk about is the issue to do with education in restoration. Majority of people are doing things because they do not really know the negative side of it. So in restoration, and especially where farmers are involved, they want something that they will be trained. If you do this, this is what you'll get, and this is the benefit that you will get. And they want to produce food. So what we are majorly working is on changing their mindset and perception, and also ensuring that they continue producing food, but sustainably, and also they restore ecosystem. And finally, working with communities, I've really learned, if you want restoration to really go far, you have to put them at their initial stages. If you plan to restore this, you want to this, put communities at the center of implementation. From that, they are able to feel part of the process. They are able to buy the idea. They are also able to give you why they have been doing this, so that from there, you pick it from what they have been doing in working the journey with them, and also changing what they feel is bad. So even as we go for this one, let's put communities at the center of implementation, and it will really work in restoring our ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, for this inspirational kickoff. I have one question to you. If you would have one question free that you would like this session to respond or to answer to, what would it be?
My question would be, how can the session come up with a policy whereby farmers are trained on how to integrate from unsustainable land production to maximum utilization of land? Are there any approaches that the forum can offer and solution to communities so that they continue farming sustainably and also restoring?
Thank you very much, Patricia. And thank you really for joining in these early morning hours from within your car. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce my first panel to you. And while I do so, I will show those questions that we have designed or come up with up front to really guide us through these panels. This session consists of two segments, two interactive dialogue sessions. The first one will focus on farmer-led restoration approaches and their impact. So principally speaking to the first question that I outlined here, what is the impact of farmer-led restoration specifically from a resilience perspective? And there will be, after this, we'll have 4 panelists, and after this panel, we will be taking questions from you, the participants. The second panel will then look specifically at the question that Patricia has just mentioned. What is actually the enabling environment that's needed to upscale farmer-led restoration, be it in terms of policy, as Patricia has just said, or be it in terms of supportive environment for civil society or community-based organizations. And throughout these 2 panels, we will address the third question: what are the necessary alliances to create that enabling environment? Because the enabling environment will not come about that easily and swiftly. This might sometimes be a struggle when we think of, for example, land rights or making extension service inclusive. Now, to my first panel. I would like to introduce to you Lee Winowicki. Lee is soil system scientist at World Agroforestry ICRAF. She was instrumental in designing ICRAF's really groundbreaking land degradation surveillance framework, working or analyzing soil and land health. Welcome, Lee. But Lee's work doesn't stop there at looking at the sort of the ecosystems. She also will still analyzes how this then links back to livelihoods and resilience of communities. My second panelist is Lucy Mulenkay. Lucy is Executive Director of the Indigenous Information Network, an Indigenous and women's rights activist. She's also the founder and co-chair of the Indigenous Women Biodiversity Network, the International Forum of Biodiversity, and an active member of the International Forum of Indigenous Women. Lucy, thank you very much for being with us today. And I'm really eager to learn your take on the post-2020 biodiversity framework afterwards. Third on my list is Professor Wilson Nyetish. Wilson is Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of Eldoret. He has an impressive academic track record. He was sort of joined Moy University in 2007 and served as the head of soil science from 2008 and 2016. He is now in his work in Eldoret focusing on countering land degradation. And last but not least, I would like to introduce to you Marcela de Souza. Marcela is founder and director of the Watershed Organization Trust Center for Resilience Studies in India, in the state of Maharashtra, and in the lovely city of Pune. Marcela has extensive experience in community health, women's empowerment, and sustainable livelihoods. She has not only a tremendous experience in working in the arid and semi-arid regions of India and Maharashtra and the different states within India, but also on community health in working in Peru. So this is my fabulous panel. So please give them a virtual welcome. And I would like to hand over to Lee, because Lee is actually the one who's going to show the only actual presentation that's going to be shown in this session to actually situate the discussions. Lee, over to you.
Great, thank you so much for this opportunity. Yes, I'm Lee Winowicki from C4ICRAF, coming to you live from Nairobi. So excited to share some of the insights on inclusive knowledge sharing models that can enhance context-specific approaches for scaling soil and landscape restoration. And as Patricia so nicely articulated, it's about bringing farmers and communities at the center of landscape restoration. Because as we know, the combined impacts of land degradation amplified by climate change mean that landscape restoration is urgently needed at scale. This cannot be achieved without engaging farmers and communities directly in the restoration process, and as Patricia said, at the very beginning of the process. I'd like to highlight some of the approaches that we've been implementing with development partners and governments across Africa, where it's about embedding co-learning to accelerate impact on the ground and increase ownership. So this schematic here demonstrates some steps in the process. So on the left, it's about understanding variations in context and drivers of adoption, and that includes farmer perceptions of drivers of degradation. Next is about this development, co-designing approaches and tools that match restoration options to be implemented to the context. So as Patricia said, she wants to learn about maximizing utilization of the land. The third point is about farmer-led innovations. This is so important that farmers really tailor and innovate the restoration options to meet his or her context. And then it's about assessing the performance of these restoration options to really understand what works where, for whom, and at what cost. And this allows us to improve the interventions, but also gives us the evidence for the co-learning and sharing to inform action, including the financial investments. So really generating and leveraging evidence as part of the project cycle. And I want to make the point across multiple stakeholders. At C4ICRAF, we found that by combining multiple innovative monitoring techniques, we can understand the drivers of degradation, better track and target restoration, but also we're bringing the monitoring and the data generation in the hands of the farmers, the development actors, the government, the stakeholders that are really the ones, as Patricia said, that are grounding the restoration. So here we're combining remote sensing, we use systematic field sampling data sets, and assisted citizen science. So specifically in this slide, if we start at the bottom, I just want to highlight the bottom left. So we have a very robust data-driven network of land degradation surveillance framework sites that provide consistent and scientifically rigorous assessments of soil and land health indicators across the global tropics. I've shown you a map here with the green dots in Africa. When we use this, we can develop maps, for example, of soil organic carbon, which we know is so important for building soil health, for increasing productivity, for meeting targets set by LDN and UNCCD. Now, when we have these assessments and we combine them now with assisted citizen science, so on the bottom right, an app we call Regreening Africa app that allows lead farmers, communities to geolocate their restoration interventions, such as farmer managed regeneration or tree planting. And then we bring these data into a platform where land managers, investors can see the progress. So here I've just shown a schematic on the top right from Rwanda, looking at 71% tree survival of 445,000 trees planted. And you can see on the left, the geolocation. So it's about data analytics, the integration of evidence, and co-designing with stakeholders decision support tools to inform and scale restoration. And as I said, all of this data is wonderful and this evidence is great, but if it's not shared, it's almost like we didn't generate it. So we use the term communities of practice. We know researchers are excellent at sharing data with themselves. Farmers are also really good at sharing information and lessons learned amongst each other. But this diagram is about how can we bring the knowledge, the lessons learned, the data, be sharing within the communities of practice, but then also between the communities of practice, so that the farmers' perceptions are also shared with the government, development actors, and researchers, and that the researchers' data collection is also fed back into this cycle with the aim of informing restoration interventions to better understand what works where for whom. Just two examples in Kenya. Again, as Yes said, we're really spotlighting Kenya here. These are active farmers' fields implementing soil water conservation measures, composting of farmyard manure, planting trees, and practicing farmer-managed natural regeneration on their farms. We also have this agroforestry basins where farmers are really tailoring these planting basins to meet their needs. So they're different sizes, they're planting different crops in it, they're composting their own manure in it. And you can read all about how this has increased the agency of women and youth in the drylands in Kenya. In closing, I just wanted to share a few key messages. Farmer-centered landscape restoration can be a key pathway for achieving food and nutrition security. And that creating this enabling environment for equitable restoration approaches, including addressing issues around land tenure, will be critical. And this point I want to make about embedding co-learning into the program across these communities of practice really can accelerate impact on the ground as it closes the learning loop and brings the evidence into the decision-making cycle at the right time when it's needed. And then, of course, financing for restoration informed by evidence is crucial. And I would even argue it de-risks the investment in land restoration. And as Patricia needed, there is still a need for capacity development for implementation and monitoring, and this will only contribute to success. I've tried to showcase some of the youth farmers, the community facilitators, and women farmers who have really seen improved livelihoods, improved income, improved food and nutrition security through implementing land restoration right here in the Eastern Drylands of Kenya. And with that, I look forward to a fabulous and engaging session with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee. This was really a very fascinating presentation for all of us. Now, if I may see my beloved panelists, I see Lucy, Marcella, Professor Nitish. Okay, we're all here. Good. Thank you very much. Lucy, my first question goes to you. Lee has outlined, let's say, a vision of farmer-led restoration. Now, you have approached the question of restoration from the perspective of working with marginalized and vulnerable groups. From your point of view, Lucy, to make this vision that Lee has described, to make this work in practice, what would, from your point of view, be needed?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for bringing the Madaraka, vision quite here with us. And Lee, thank you very much. When you were presenting, I think I figured myself, I wish this was just right there in the community where we work. But first, let me thank Patricia. She did quite well. And I thought after her speaking, what else will I say? Because she had put all the issues on the table, especially bringing the context of women and making sure that the community is really involved. Patricia, you presented quite well, and you said how scientists and how all this data is collected, all these experiences there, but how does it really work out there with the community? And I was asking myself, maybe actually Patricia should add and see, or we put in a challenge and say, how can the same, like the apps you have explained and so on, be taken to some of the marginalized remote areas for the schools and the teachers and the communities to learn also to take up some data? Because if you look at the dry lands and if you look at those degraded lands, which are totally damaged and very sadly so, they are from those remote areas whereby it's very difficult for anybody to say they reach there. Most of the time we hear, because of security or because there is no infrastructure to arrive there. But if there are schools there and there are communities living there, I think it will be very important to think about it very effectively. I'm also saying this just because I'm also with the experience of working with very remote communities whereby they work in their own kind of way to make sure that they feed their families, they restore their lands, and so on. And without experiences of any scientific experience, they learn from each other. They are able to exchange their own ideas and look at them and see how they can restore. What we do with the women is that we make sure that even though we train them in different ways from the different counties, we work in different counties like Marsabit, West Pokot. Actually, behind me, what you're seeing back there is Kacheliba in the area of North Pokot, where we went to visit some women where they're also working and really have restored their land by planting fruits, different vegetables, and that's how they are making their income. So that's to tell you that there are so many remote women, despite the fact that their land is really degraded, they try as much as possible to make sure that they have economies moving. And so when you look at that, the most important thing is to make sure that their work is recognized and the involving of those communities, let them be recognized and be involved. That in any counties, in those counties, in the remote counties, they should also be able to remember to include the women and youth so that they can work together and be able to do that. Why am I saying women and youth and leaving men out? It's not that I'm leaving them out, but the fact is in all the indigenous communities, we have, everyone has a role to play. And one of the roles for the men is to maybe take the livestock out there and even move to look for greener pastures. So this particular group of members of the group of the communities are the one left at home to be able to do that. We have succeeded in terms of the women coming up with different ideas, exchanging from each other, learning, and so on. And they have been able to restore some of the land very effectively, even though not to the percentage that we'd love to have it. But there is still a lot of junk of land that which is near them, sometimes it really discourages them because they could restore one side and the other side is damaged. So we still have a lot of work to do for Africa and for Kenya for that matter in different areas. So that I'm just also thinking that it's very important to also recommend, as what you have said, Patricia, the issue of capacity building, making sure that we create awareness and work, not work singly. You have to have partners. You have to work with the people, with other NGOs, with other partners like we are working now with these webinars. And the good thing with webinars, we are learning a lot. And when we share this with the communities, we are able also to add value to what exactly we are talking about. So it's really important to do that, and to also, because these communities have really learned a lot of knowledge that they have with them, traditional knowledge that they learn from among themselves and also from elders. And they know even the issue of soil. Sometimes I go and they tell, this soil is not good for farming, this soil is good for that, but we can enhance it by planting this vegetation. And we have also had women teaching others to learn about the dry land farming, to put the soil in the sacks and plant vegetables and hang them in the house so that they are not destroyed. So all this issue of really being able to work together is very important. And when policies are being developed and when they're even being planned, let's involve the communities. It's very, very crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you for really providing a lot of very, let's say, visual insights into what Lee has described as co-learning. Lucy, I would nevertheless still like to put you on the hot seat. Our friend Wangu has run a Twitter poll ahead of this session, and she was asking what's the biggest impediment to farmer-led restoration, and she had put forward 4 questions. The first one was, is it lack of technology? Is it lack of finance? Is it lack of access to extension services? Or is it lack of secure land tenure? And the overwhelming majority of those who responded to the Twitter poll basically said it is a lack of secure land tenure. How does the results of this Twitter poll resonate with you and your experience?
It's very true. It's very true about the land tenure system. It's very, very challenging in Africa, in Kenya for that matter. And as you said earlier on, I think it was you who said about the development and how sometimes you find that the lands, the governments think that by having large-scale farming, like for example, in the side of Transmara and Narok County, we have large farms of wheat, we have others of sugarcane, just to give examples. And these large, they also deny the right of some of the communities to be able to develop their own food systems, which is very crucial, and especially women. There is also the issue of the laws of land tenure and community laws. Some of the laws, even though our constitution says that women should own land and they should own like anyone else, is still quite some challenge in terms of who owns this land and who can be able to develop it. And in a household where we have traditional communities where the women are always at the private domain, even though struggling to be there because they're the ones who are feeding the world, is still a big challenge. But what we are saying, despite these big problems that are there, and also considering that even though many of the ones who have answered those questions have not talked about the extension workers who the government had for many years back in the past, they were able to teach the communities different, technical ways of farming, apart from, of course, what we discourage a lot about using chemicals and so on. And for all the communities that we work with, we really recommend them to use organic farming, which is very important to them. And they will always start with a kitchen garden to learn. Why? Because we have the pastoralists and the hunter-gatherers and different communities who are also farmers, fisher folks, and so on. And they have to learn from each other because of climate change, because of the land tenure issues that we've mentioned. Some of the communities like pastoralists are even bound to change their, their normal economies, which they were running before, like livestock and so on. And they have to go into farming, and they have to have someone to really guide them. And it's very important that they've been guided among themselves, and but we are still lacking those technologies which should be enhanced to them. But though we really encourage the traditional technologies where they can be able to work and use a safer way of farming, and of course have a good diet, and make sure that even whatever they plant in their farms also encourage the issue of having the medicinal plants, the medicinal foods, which are their traditional foods that are there, so that at least they can remain healthy, because that's what we are all looking forward to.
Thank you, Lucy. I will revert back to you later on the post-2020 biodiversity framework, but now I would like to actually change to a different agroecological zone within Kenya, moving to Western Kenya, and I would invite Professor Wilson Ngetich with a question. Western Kenya has basically benefited from decades of investments in sustainable land management. And I was wondering, now that you have listened to the examples that Lee have given and to the insights that Lucy has shared, how does this feature within this agroecological zone of Western Kenya? Professor Ngetich, please.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the excellent talks that I've heard from the previous speakers. Really in Western Kenya, where we are working, especially in West Pokot, which is really having huge gullies because of the erosion that has been there. Indeed, as you rightly say, there have been previous engagements with communities there. However, those engagements did not last, because we still find degradation in those areas. Massive gullies still continue. What we are looking at ourselves is to try and see how we can find something that is lasting by engaging the communities. We have a model within McKnight, which is called Farmer Research Network. What Lee was actually talking about, involving the farmers themselves to lead the restoration process themselves. Previous engagements have not brought the farmers on board to be able to lead the restorations. So when the engagements left, it meant that the farmers and whatever was put before there could now fizzle out. But what we are doing is involving the farmers themselves to lead the restoration. They are the ones, of course, who will be able to tell us, we want to do this, and so on and so forth. We had, of course, had to take a bit of time to build social capital, do a lot of system thinking with them, do a lot of co-creation is a word that we introduce with them, so that we are not giving them things. We are like co-creating with them, brainstorming with them, and putting out a plan for the entire period where we are engaging with them. Of course, there is funding, that is a crucial issue. But what we have seen, what we are excited ourselves, is that not only are we informing the ones Lucy mentioned about, but we are involving the men, especially the men and the schools. The primary schools, we have excited them. They are doing something about the tree planting and the rest. The area that we are working on had a lot of sand harvesting. And that was the first point that we entered in and told them, look, this is a resource that has been taken away from you, and we need to make sure that it is benefiting you. So we have put in a number of sand dams in the area, which is helping to stabilize the soil. We have put in a number of terraces with them, and with the co-creation aspect of it, we are seeing them beautifully engaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nitish. It's really interesting to see how this notion of co-creation, which was, I don't know, 5 to 10 years still a buzzword that actually nobody was using, let alone living up to in this particular panel, is really one of the foundational principles. So thank you very much, Professor, for sharing your insights. We also included an element of South exchange of experiences, and that's why I'm very happy that Marcella is here. Marcella, before I give you the floor, I would like to remind all of us of the 3 questions that we put forward, which are sort of what are the impacts that farm-led restoration can bring, what is the enabling environment that is necessary for them to achieve that. And I think Professor Nitish and Lucy have already sort of elaborated quite a bit on this. And the last one really is, what are the alliances that are necessary to bring those about? If you could maybe in your response, maybe speak to that as well. Marcella, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this session. And from the time we have begun it, I have been learning a lot from all of you of what's happening in Africa. And I can vibe very well with your situation. What I would like to add also is we have a far greater degradation over here in India. And the area where I work is mainly semi-arid, where we have very little water, very little land, and everybody is struggling for a survival. So I'm sharing from this experience of what the same problems that we are all facing as to how do we need, together with the community, to restore the lands. And over the years of experience that my organization has had in restoring degraded lands and in developing capacities for various other agencies and communities, there are 2 key elements that we have learned in this process. If we want the community to lead it, the community needs to be at the center, as we've all said. They need to own the whole development process. And for this, we realize that besides the knowledge that they need, we realized for us the community could not just be a few farmers. You all know that my country is very densely populated. The lands are small. But if we have to regenerate the land, we need to bring the entire community together. People who own large parcels of land, those who own small parcels of land, those who have irrigated land and rain-fed land, the very marginal farmers, so that this entire process of regeneration through watershed development, we do it through watershed development of conserving soil and water from rich to valley with reforestation of the trees. And at the same time, as the water and soil is stored in the landscape below, it's the people who can improve on agriculture. But what we realized was that unless we took it as a whole package, keeping in mind that people had to get production through agriculture, we needed to do a very integrated approach, beginning from conserving the soil, because I have to say there was heavy erosion in all these areas because of water scarcity, because of water flows. And at the time, and for most of the year, the area would be very degraded. So there is also, together with this, a whole exploitation of the soil. So when we are talking of land degradation over here, there are two aspects. The degradation because of erosion, loss of tree cover, and loss of capacity to store water. This is the part that is handled by watershed development. And the second component is when agriculture is made possible because of water availability, the need to conserve the soil health. So these are the two aspects we realized that we had to do with the community as a whole, bringing all of them together. And that was one of the biggest challenges we had. So we developed this whole methodology of engaging the community, putting them in the center, helping them to develop the leadership from within. And as you all shared, learning from them and developing their capacities to lead the process. This part of the capacity to lead the process necessitated that we had to bring in scientific knowledge, pool in resources from various experts, from those who are working in the water sector, those working on land, on biodiversity, on the forest department, the departments of the government that are bringing in agriculture. We had to bring in all of them together so that it could be a concerted effort. This is the biggest challenge we have, and yet we know that there is no alternative. We have to proceed in a way of joining hands if we are looking at sustainability for tomorrow. So that is on the one hand of the, yes, please.
Sorry, what you've just said on the joining hands, I would like to use this entry point because we have a question here from the panelists who basically ask, and I really ask my dear panelists, so Professor Nitish, Marcella, Lee, and Lucy, to just give a thumbs up or thumbs down. And I know this is a sort of a very general question, but sort of summarizing one segment of this panel up, the question is, so is bottom up more effective than top down approaches in landscape restoration? So can I have a thumbs up or thumbs down by my dear panelists on this question?
Together.
Okay, thank you. Now, Marcella, if you could speak about the together and please wrap it up because I have a number of other questions that are waiting to be answered. Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you please repeat?
Yeah, sorry, I had interrupted you and I was just wondering whether you would like to wrap up so that I then can move to the next questions.
Yes, and then when I looked at the other part of the partnerships, it's necessary we realize, and I would say that it's not only a bottom up, it must be a bottom up and a top down, and we have to work jointly together because no one can work in isolation. No sectors can work in isolation because one sector will contradict the other and bring out the negative impacts. And that is why we are more convinced that we need to work in a partnership in this whole process of ecosystems restoration and working towards our survival. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. I would like to pose a question by one of our participants, and she or he asks, what are the sustainability considerations? What are the sustainability considerations to be borne in mind in community-led land restoration initiatives? And she or he asks in particular, what is the role of the private sector in this? And as none of you has really addressed the role of the private sector, and I know Gautier will speak about this in a few minutes, but I would like to hear your voices, please. And I'll start in the reverse order. Marcella first,
From the sustainability perspective, I think an important aspect to be considered is the climate factor. Because we need to look at the climate factor as well as survival for tomorrow. And in the need for addressing the challenges of the climate or losses due to not only climate but various other factors, then an overproduction, then we tend to overexploit the land. And that is the big challenge. So we need to work at it together. And at the same time, with the private sector would come in. Here we would look at bringing in the private sector into this whole concept of looking at how they would need to meet the sustainability needs, the SDG demands, and then in this way putting in a measure where we can all measure progress for tomorrow with the community at the center. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. Professor Nitish, what is your take on the role of the private sector in these farmer-led, community-led restoration efforts?
Thank you. The private sector has a big role to play. Depends on how we see the private sector in terms of they are bringing in their investment into the area. Really, the aspect of what the farmers are able to produce from their restoration. I heard Lucy talking about fruit trees and the rest. Those are things that we are also putting up. In the value chain, the marketing chain itself, the private sector has an aspect to be able to spur the restoration, because once we have the produce from the farmers, this will be able to go out. The other aspect of private sector is we are also trying to put in sustainability in our project by making sure that the farmers will have some spin-offs, what we are calling it circular economy, some spin-off from the things that they're doing, which will really be plowed back to continue the restoration within the farms. And that is where the private sector can come in. What we have done ourselves is we have not really brought in the private sector per se, but we are engaging a number of players within the area who can be able to spin off what we are doing. So private sector has a role to play. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucy, you're the next.
Yes, on the issue of private sector, well, I do agree on what the rest has spoken about, especially Marcella from India talking about the really important of working together. And I think it's very important for the private sector to also understand and be able to work with the community by also respecting their knowledge that they have. And one of the key areas where I always have an issue with the private sector, maybe like when it comes to large scale farming, or rather even bringing them to the community, unless they understand the way we want our food production, is the issue of using industrial chemicals and so on. That's the only where I have a problem with. And I think it's very important for Dr. Ngetich to make sure that when they are dealing with the small scale farmers, because those are the ones whom I'm talking about myself, we need to have a way that they can be able to keep their seeds sustainably and not use any GMOs or use any seeds that will just, grow. And then after that, storage is an issue, and sustainability is an issue. So those are the small examples that I'm giving. But the issue of respecting and acknowledging the systems of the communities is very, very crucial. But we also work with the private sector, especially, is very important to involve them when we are talking about issues on biodiversity. And I'm sure, Jess, you had said you wanted to really ask a question on the issue of biodiversity and post-2020. When we are talking about the issue of benefit, access and benefit sharing, especially on genetic resources, it's very important also for the private sector to play that role in the environment, to be able to work with different communities and understanding their rights and where where they have to give consent in different ways. So this is very important for us also. And as we continue discussing issues of the post-2020, we cannot separate all these issues we are talking together. Either they are about dry lands, either it's about protection of biodiversity, climate change, or any other, even in wetlands, even what Marciela is talking and what Leah was talking about. We need to integrate all these issues. They need to work together. We need to focus and see that Indigenous people have and local community has mainstreamed their work for a long time in different ways. And this is very important for us to be able to think about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Lee, you had the pleasure of a presentation, and my timekeeper is telling me that I'm totally out of control here. So you have your mini pitch on the private sector if you would like to add something to what the previous panelists have said.
No, just that it's been fabulous, and this importance of addressing root causes of degradation and starting the capacity development, as Lucy said, in school, in primary school, including on collecting data, is critical. And this element of trust and knowledge sharing with all stakeholders. So we meet in the middle, as Marcela said. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, panelists. We will now address or show one example of how these root causes can be addressed. It is an example from Burkina Faso, an activity implemented by our partner organization, GRAF. We have the pleasure of having the executive director, Koudougou, with us, who will speak about this example afterwards. But first of all, I would like to ask Massimo and the team to please share the video. Thank you.
L'application des autorités, des chefs coutumiers, plus les hommes même du village, ça a donné une force particulière aux femmes de croire en eux-mêmes pour pouvoir continuer le combat même après le projet.
J'allais dire l'approche participative, elle est très bonne avec l'implication de l'ensemble des acteurs, à savoir les communes, les services techniques et même certains partenaires extérieurs.
Du kɔnɔ ni fɛn misɛn denmisɛnninw bi kɛra ni cɛ kelen tɛ se ka lɔ n'a ye o kɔsɔn ne fana ko a ka yɔrɔ denni dɔ d'i ma n fana bɛ to k'an ta kelen kelen yaala an ka ɲɔgɔn dɛmɛ.
Thank you, Massimo and Nico. I now have the pleasure to introduce the second panel to you. And in fact, Kourougou Saidou, who is the head executive secretary of the Groupe de Recherche et d'Action sur la Foncière, GRAF, in Burkina Faso, is with us today. Kourougou, bonjour. And we have the pleasure of having Gauthier with us. Gauthier is the head of the director of the LDN Fund, really one of the truly innovative financial instruments blending public and private resources for restoration purposes. Gauthier, a very warm welcome to you. Now, my dear panelists, you have heard a lot about the sort of the potential of farmer-led restoration, and I would like to ask you, Kourougou, in view of what we heard, and in view of the decade on ecosystem restoration that is sort of just now launched about now, what are your expectations really when it comes to what such a decade needs to bring for the civil society organizations working on land rights with communities?
Alors, merci Yes. C'est vrai, je suis Saïdou Kourougou du GRAF, groupe de recherche et d'action sur le foncier. Comme il a dit, c'est un réseau d'experts qui travaillent particulièrement sur les questions foncières. Alors, nous, en tant qu'organisation de la société civile, travaillant sur les questions foncières, nous pensons que la question de la gouvernance foncière est une question fondamentale dans les actions de restauration de nos sols. C'est un aspect clé, parce que vous savez, nos populations ne peuvent pas, ou du moins ne veulent pas prendre le risque de s'investir dans les actions de restauration des sols, qui sont du reste des actions énormément chères, avec un effet à long terme, c'est-à-dire tu n'investis pas tout de suite et tu as des résultats tout de suite. Et donc, au regard de tout cela, ils ne veulent pas prendre le risque d'investir leurs meilleures ressources dans la restauration des sols tant qu'ils ne sont pas sûrs que leurs droits seront garantis sur ces terres-là. Alors, donc, nous pensons qu'il est fondamental que nous évitions dans nos politiques cette forme d'isolement, de cloisonnement entre les secteurs. Parce que ce que nous avons constaté, c'est que les départements ministériels qui travaillent sur les restaurations des sols ne prennent pas suffisamment en compte la dimension foncière dans leurs actions, dans leurs politiques. Pareillement, pour les départements ministériels qui travaillent sur les questions de gouvernance foncière, n'ont pas un regard suffisant sur les questions de restauration des sols. Donc, nous pensons qu'il est important que nous puissions arriver à des politiques intégrées. Des politiques intégrées, c'est quoi? C'est des politiques en matière de restauration des sols qui prennent suffisamment en compte la dimension foncière, mais aussi des politiques en matière foncière qui ont un regard assez suffisant sur les questions de restauration des sols. Alors, parce que ce que je veux ajouter, c'est que malheureusement, nous avons constaté que du reste, il y a une sorte d'absence de politique le plus souvent en matière de restauration des sols. C'est vrai, ces dernières années, il y a un effort dans la conception de politique de restauration des sols. Mais malheureusement, et comme je dis, cela n'est pas toujours appliqué sur le terrain pour diverses raisons. Il y a d'abord les raisons financières, les raisons de ressources humaines, etc. Et donc, nous pensons qu'il est important que la volonté politique soit plus forte à ce niveau-là pour que nous ayons des politiques de restauration des sols, mais des politiques de restauration des sols intégrées, c'est-à-dire qui prennent suffisamment en compte les questions foncières dans leur mise en œuvre.
Thank you, Kourougou, and I apologize for responding in English. The integrated policy that you requested that blends question of soil and land restoration with the question of land tenure, what would be sort of, if the decade on ecosystem restoration is about sort of, it will be launched and is about to be implemented also in Burkina Faso, what would be your expectations really, how this decade could support this integrated policy that you have asked for? If you could place one request.
Je ne suis pas sûr d'avoir très bien compris la question. Si Harry peut bien reprendre pour moi pour que je puisse véritablement répondre, apporter la réponse qui sied.
So if sort of the more sort of the expectation that you would have, the wish that you would like to put forward for the decade on ecosystem restoration to really move ahead with the integrated policy that you have asked for?
Alors, je pense que le plus gros souhait, c'est que les populations qui sont les premières concernées dans les questions de restauration des sols soient les plus impliquées possible. Parce que vous avez vu dans la vidéo qui vient de passer que nous avons travaillé à cela, parce que c'est ce qui manque fondamentalement dans la conception des politiques, dans la mise en œuvre des politiques, dans les actions de restauration des sols. C'est vrai, on restaure les sols sur lesquels des populations travaillent, mais ces populations ne savent pas toujours quelles sont, comment ces actions ont été imaginées, quelles seront la suite après la fin, parce qu'en général, c'est à partir de projets que ces actions sont menées. Donc, nous pensons que le plus important à ce niveau-là, pour que nous ayons une restauration des sols réussie, c'est qu'il faut le plus possible impliquer les populations locales à la base. Ça, c'est un. Il faut évidemment que cette implication ne soit pas seulement avec les populations, mais que toutes les autres parties. Parce que vous savez, dans nos pays, nous sommes aujourd'hui dans un mécanisme, dans un système de décentralisation. La gouvernance foncière comme la gestion des politiques de façon générale est confiée aux maires, etc., aux communes. Et donc, nous pensons qu'il est important que les communes soient également les plus impliquées parce que ce sont eux qui sont les premiers acteurs au niveau local. Donc, une implication de l'ensemble des acteurs qui devraient concourir donc à une restauration des sols réussie et donc à des politiques de développement plus intégrées et mieux réussies.
Thank you very much, Koudou. And I think what your statement really forms an excellent basis to the question that I would pose to Gauthier. I think what Koudou has outlined is really a complex of challenges from both the side of the decentralization policies, how to empower communities on the ground to really become agents of restoration, and in addition, the question of lack of integrated policies. Now, in this conundrum of really challenging topics, now the question of how do we actually finance these restoration approaches so that they benefit the farmers is obviously a key question, something that the LDN Fund has worked on for quite some time now, has gathered quite some experience. So Gauthier, I would like to ask you to please be so kind and share your views on how to enter responsible finance for farmer-led restoration in the challenging context that Koudou has just described.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, yes, and thank you again for the invitation. Very happy to share views today. I hope the sound is good. Okay, so yes, as you pointed out, I mean, we have been working after I've been selected by the UNCCD to establish the LDN Fund with the objective of attracting more capital into land restoration because it's really, I mean, there is a big funding gap, so to onboard public, but above all also private capital in land restoration, and the other hand, to provide this capital to land use operators that are the most suited to restore land in a sustainable way and impactful ways. And indeed, I mean, the local communities, the smallholder farmers are the one who have the knowledge, the experience, and are the best positioned to be the stewards of land restoration. So we've been working to identify models that can at the same time help these actors develop their activities while attracting more capital and show it is not only impactful, but also in the end, commercially viable. And it's a good investment opportunity in the end, because this is what we need to do to have more capital available. On these complex issues also that were presented by Koudou and previous panelists, we know there is, on the one hand, the solutions we need to identify and the opportunities, while also being aware of the various risks that also are there with the especially land tenure risk. And we know there is a need for more public policy to create a more secured environment that will then enable further private investments. That being said, public policy is important, but there are also bottom-up initiatives and especially NGOs, civil society organizations that are promoting good solutions. And we saw a great video just before to show how this can be also further coordinated. And with the LDN Fund, we also have the chance to have regular dialogue with the CSO panel of the UNCCD that is promoting many solutions. And I think this nexus between private, public and civil society is key to define also the right solution. We should not only wait for the public and authorities to define the solution, but also propose them like you have. And to be more precise, what we've seen recently is probably two encouraging approaches to further scale up private investment in community-based land restoration. It's on the one hand, a new generation of entrepreneurs that are often coming from NGOs that have been working with community development, with really social innovation to work in partnership with many communities and smallholders, and that are turning the NGO activity into a business, that have created spin-off and are now, instead of raising capital from ODA or philanthropy, are now getting to commercial capital to continue what has been initiated under an NGO approach into a more commercial one, but while keeping the same integrity. And this new generation of entrepreneur, I think, is really a key parameter to connect this community-based approach with further private capital. And second, an important point, I think that is also very important, is the different revenue stream that these land restoration projects can generate to be viable. And we discussed and we heard about some supply chains where the private sector can also play a role in providing assistance and access to markets. But there is also an important dimension these days that is carbon. And with Mirova, we have been working not only on the LDN Fund, but also on other funds, especially in the REDD+ context, with really community-based projects, especially in Peru, with indigenous communities, with small-scale farmers, and where carbon revenue has really been a critical element to scale up land restoration activities with communities, and can really make the difference to attract further private investment with this additional revenue stream for carbon credits. And we mentioned soil organic carbon for land restoration, especially in drylands. There needs to be also more recognition of this carbon stored in the soil in the carbon credit market to provide additional revenue stream for the project and create even more favorable condition to scale up what works on the ground. And I think here there is another interesting trend. I hope it's useful input. Over to you, yes.
Thank you very much, Gauthier. I think this is a very interesting point. And again, I would like to relay this back to Koudougu. If we imagine that there will actually be resources available for soil organic carbon payments, and I fully understand your line of reasoning, Gauthier, that this is actually one of the key sources of additional finance for farmland restoration. But if there's now increasing interest in a resource, land and soil that's already scarce, what are the land tenure implications of such investment opportunities? And Koudougu, if you think of the Burkinabe context, if you assume that there would be investments in soil organic carbon coming about, what would be the risks that you would see, and how would you think we should be counteracting them? And sorry, Koudougu, you're muted still.
Sorry. Je pense que quand on parle de crédit carbone, cela suppose que nous avons suffisamment d'arbres. Et que donc nous avons un massif en termes de végétaux qui permet justement d'avoir ce crédit carbone-là. Or, malheureusement, ce que nous avons constaté jusqu'ici, c'est que les régimes fonciers que nous avons dans nos pays ne permettent pas encore à une certaine catégorie d'acteurs d'investir dans la reforestation, n'est-ce pas, dans le reboisement. Et donc, nous pensons que préalablement à ce mécanisme de crédit carbone, nous devons travailler à donner suffisamment de confiance aux populations, notamment les plus pauvres, notamment ceux qui n'ont pas de droit de propriété sur les terres sur lesquelles ils exploitent là, d'avoir suffisamment de confiance pour justement restaurer ces terres-là à partir de reboisement. Parce que, justement, quand tu n'es pas propriétaire d'une terre, tu ne peux pas te permettre d'y reboiser, tu ne peux pas te permettre d'y planter des arbres. Or, la condition préalable pour bénéficier d'un crédit carbone, c'est cela. Donc, nous pensons que, dans nos pays, nous avons il y a des forêts classées. Et quand je prends le cas du Burkina, c'est une donne qui est suffisamment importante parce que je pense qu'une très large partie du territoire était constituée de forêts classées. Malheureusement, ces dernières années, nous avons une forte dégradation de ces forêts classées-là, du fait justement d'une pression foncière autour de ces forêts classées, etc. Donc, nous pensons que pour parler de crédit carbone, nos politiques devraient d'abord travailler à restaurer les forêts qui existent et qui sont des propriétés de l'État. Ça, c'est un. Et deuxièmement, travailler donc à ce que les communautés qui disposent encore de ressources foncières puissent, sur une partie de ces ressources foncières-là, faire des reboisements suffisants pour avoir un massif forestier assez important pour bénéficier de ce crédit carbone-là. Troisièmement, pour la question du privé, c'est vrai, dans nos pays, le privé est de plus en plus important, privé national comme privé international, mais nous pensons qu'il faut réfléchir suffisamment au niveau de leur implication dans la question de la restauration de nos sols, parce que jusqu'ici, il constitue plus ou moins le problème parce que nous avons une forte concentration des terres entre les mains d'une élite économique, d'une élite politique, donc d'un certain privé qui justement a comme contre-coup une insécurisation des plus pauvres, des plus faibles, et donc leur exclusion progressive de la gouvernance foncière. Donc nous pensons qu'il faut suffisamment réfléchir, et c'est là par exemple que le privé pourrait jouer un rôle aussi important, c'est-à-dire accompagner les populations et qui disposent de ressources foncières, de suffisamment de sécurité sur leur sol, à restaurer, donc en mettant à leur disposition la ressource nécessaire pour restaurer, ou alors travailler à restaurer en concession, n'est-ce pas, en concession, en bail, en location des forêts étatiques pour justement bénéficier de ce crédit carbone. Voilà ce que nous pensons qu'il faut quand on parle de crédit carbone, assurer préalablement la sécurité des populations sur les terres sur lesquelles ils exploitent et leur permettre donc justement de reboiser suffisamment pour bénéficier de ce crédit carbone.
Thank you, Koudougu, for this comprehensive response. And this actually gets me back to a question, Gauthier, that we've discussed at earlier instances, but I think it would be important to be shared with the participants of this session to sort of to counteract the risk that Koudougu has outlined. The LDN fund has put in place strict safeguard policies. Maybe you could elaborate on those a little bit so that participants can understand better what are the sort of the crash barriers, so to speak, that are being put in place so that the investments are actually being done in a responsible way.
Sure. Yes. I mean, we see a lot of momentum these days on indeed planting trees for climate, and a lot of commitments from big corporates to plant trees everywhere. But of course, this is really challenging, and the risk of all of this is land grabbing, is people acquiring land and then just planting trees for climate benefit without taking context-specific aspects, etc. So the LDN fund is really set up from the beginning as an impact fund, so abiding by robust standards that we have indeed published and be subject to consultation from civil society in particular. And there have been many very interactive discussions and constructive ones, which have led us to not only apply in what are the IFC performance standards that are seen very often as pretty robust standards, but we have also added, especially under the recommendation of the CSOs, the reference to, or the explicit reference to the VGGT, which we know is providing additional safeguards and protection with respect to land tenure. And indeed, also the Interlaken Group has provided interesting operationalization terms of the VGGT for private sector actors. So with this, in the legal documentation of the fund, It means that for the project we are selecting on the ground, they are subject to initial screening and analysis by our ESG experts, but they also are translated into the legal documentation with the project developer that have to abide by the VGGT. So there is a chain of legal commitments, and if there is any breach, any land grabbing risk, any communities that are not onboarded the right way, or where there hasn't been an FPIC process, for instance, and where there are irregularities in this respect, then it's also a trigger for defaulting the contract. So it's checks and balances. But beyond this contractual protection, what is essential, it is to support entrepreneurs that are from the beginning willing to work with the communities, that are willing to have a inclusive approach, because else it will not work. The smallholders are key change agents. Having projects that are working against them or trying to not respect any rights, either legal or customary, will fail over the long run. So it's not only a matter of standards, it's also only a matter of doing sustainable and good business. And what is encouraging is that we see a lot of entrepreneurs that are from the beginning working with the communities, and most of the projects that we are financing at LDN Fund, but also at Mirova level, are those working with smallholders, and there are new models. And here it's another aspect I did not mention, but technology is also very interesting. All the mobile technology to coordinate large number of smallholders working with communities to facilitate access to finance, access to market, access to technical assistance is also a way to make the project really inclusive. And this is the key mitigant beyond the legal protection of the standards. It's really to have inclusive project from the beginning.
Thank you, Gauthier. And what you just said nicely links back to the question that Lee has raised in the beginning on the role of what is the role of smallholders, of farmers in gathering data and collecting the data and feeding it back, not only to monitor the impact, but also, if I understood you now correctly, on the question of accountability. So I think this is a key point to make. We have a little bit more than 10 minutes left. And I would like to first of all thank both Koudougu and Gauthier for their time. And I would like to pose a question from one of our participants, and I would like to pose this to Miriam, because this is actually a question that directly addresses what CCD has been, or the parties to the convention have decided upon during the last conference of the parties. But first, Miriam Medel Garcia is Chief of the External Relations Policy and Advocacy Department at the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. A warm welcome to you, Miriam. She's a Mexican diplomat by training, and prior to this role, she has been serving as a special assistant to the Executive Secretary of UNFCCC. So she's well versed to address the question that Linda Ogayo has raised. And I would like to read it out, and then I would like to invite you to make your comments, Miriam. Linda asks, how do we address the policy gaps to connect the commitment being made at the national and global levels and initiatives being done at the community level that are largely project driven and most of the times do not last longer than the project itself? So with this challenging question, Miriam, I would like to hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jess, and thank you for having me. I will try to be brief, and it is indeed a very good question. And it's momentous, I would say, because what we are seeing with the 3 Rio conventions, I mean, all the panelists already referred to the very, very clear interlinkages between climate change, biodiversity, and land. And then we have these very large scale or top-down approaches of policy for policy creation. And then it is our responsibility to bring them to actual implementation on the ground with the participation of communities. So I would say we have some instruments within the 3 conventions that are, I mean, the national, the NDCs in the case of climate change, the national action plans and the land degradation neutrality targets in the case of the UNCCD, and the biodiversity targets in the case of the CBD. So I think that it's very important that in every project, in every initiative that we take at any level, be community, be national, be at the regional, sub-regional, etc., these are considered. That will, I guess, provide more assurances, will facilitate financial flows, and will also ensure coherence with in everything that we are doing. At some points, it just seems that we have all these different efforts that are not coordinated. But these national implementation instruments from the three conventions are actually I would say, the thread that links everything together. Over to you.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you for taking on this challenging question. Now, parties to the convention have taken really landmark decisions at the last conference of the parties on both creating an enabling environment for land degradation neutrality and as well as a landmark decision linking the convention to the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land. I'm not so sure whether all the participants are aware of these landmark decisions. So I was wondering, Miriam, whether you could please be so kind to share some of these, the content of these decisions with the participants.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, if they are not aware, what I was thinking when I was listening to them is that I will make sure that they are aware, because all their input, their knowledge, everything that they share today with us is quite relevant for the implementation of this decision. I mean, we heard a lot about, we heard very enlightening concepts like farmer-led innovation, like communities of practices, bottom-down and top-down partnerships approaches. We heard about the need for finance, and I'm very happy that Gautier is actually very well versed in the VGGT and in the tenure decision. But I think what really resonated with me is this: we need all of this. We need a lot of things for this restoration, large-scale restorations project to work. But we need certainties, we need assurances, we need equality, equity, and we need trust. Some panelists already referred to that. And this is where tenure comes in and where the decision comes in. So the decision was, it's a historical landmark decision taken in COP14 of the UNCCD with much support, and I actually would say through the initiative of civil society organizations. So the decision acknowledges the importance of addressing tenure in the context of the convention and recognizes the importance of promoting equal tenure rights and access to land for all. Women and men, indigenous groups, local communities, everybody. It's anchored in the realization that was also mentioned here, that tenure is fundamental to responsible land governance. It's a vital component of sustainable land management, and it is an essential element in addressing desertification, land degradation, and drought, which is what we all are trying to do here as our contribution to solve many of the issues that we are dealing with as humanity and addressing sustainable development goals. The decision has launched a new whole area of work with three streams. Policy, whereas with this voluntary guidelines from FAO will be translated into a technical guide for our parties. And we are very happy to cooperate also with DMG indirectly on the production of the technical guide. A work stream on awareness raising and a work stream on reporting to have better data and see how to incorporate better and how to put it forward for our parties to utilize in the development of national policies. In this whole area of work of tenure, the conversation going forward in the context of the intergovernmental process will be crucial. We will need the inputs, the experience, the knowledge, the participation of everybody. Policymakers, but also communities, private sector, but also the farmers, the landowners, the advocacy groups, everybody. We will need the perspectives of all stakeholders. As was already said by some of the panelists as well, the conversation and the decision-making process will not be easy. It will be a challenge because it touches upon many issues that kind of sustain the current state of affairs, I would say, in relation to land ownership and agriculture and food production, etc. So it's not going to be an easy conversation, but it's one that we really need to have to be able to implement these projects at scale and to make a difference with regard to land restoration and land degradation neutrality. We are very fortunate, and this is this is my takeaway from this session, is that we have the diverse and rich pool of resources and knowledge, and we have the ingenuity that all the panels here refer to. For me, those are already very, very good reasons for hope, and make me believe sincerely that we will, with everybody's, as Marcela was saying, together, we will be able to address these challenges and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you basically for offering really the concluding statement of this panel, so that we are aware of the challenges, but I think we are starting this decade of ecosystem restoration with both the knowledge and the policy environment at a global level in place. So, and sort of, if you then work together with forming strategic partnerships, I think we can really be able to move that question ahead. Now, you have really all been fabulous panelists. I was wondering, Massimo, whether we could all switch on the video so that we could wave goodbye to all those who got up very early to attend this session, whether it's possible to show us all. So Lucy, well, whoever is there, great. Kudugu, I don't know whether you're still around.
I'm here.
Perfect. So you have been fabulous panelists. Thank you very much. And I think I would like to only conclude on the notion that this session has made a strong case for farmer-led restoration. And I think none of us here has conveyed the message that farmers or communities are saints. We are not, and they are not. But I think what this panel has clearly conveyed is that we can progressively build the institutions of self-governance for these communities to actually assume this role of the challenging restoration practice and approaches that we have described here today. And I think we have left, as Miriam has concluded, really with a nice statement of hope that the knowledge is there, and now it's just about forming the strategic alliances to actually make this happen. You have been fabulous panelists. Thank you very much for taking the time this morning to join the session. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you who have listened in to this session. And I wish you all a lovely day and a fabulous Global Landscapes Forum. It has been a big pleasure. Thank you very much. I wish you all a good day.
Hi everyone, this is Mordecai Ogada. I'm a Kenyan wildlife ecologist and a conservation policy expert, and a speaker at this year's GLF conference on restoration of Africa's drylands. This conference is very timely, of course, as we all know, and the restoration of Africa's drylands is a very crucial topic at this time. One of the things that we all have to keep an eye on is that restoration is a very powerful word. It implies what happens after some kind of disaster. But we have to ask ourselves, what are we restoring it from, and what are we restoring it to? Africa's drylands are crucial for biodiversity, human livelihood, etc., etc. And most of all, and most importantly, we must inform the global audience and keep them informed of the fact that Africa's drylands are also home to millions of African people. The fact that they're this important for biodiversity implies an equilibrium that has existed there for tens of thousands of years at least in several parts of Africa. So this must have been something going right. And I think restoration has to look closely at strengthening and restoring that wherever it has been lost. However, a lot of conservation practitioners see restoration in the light of fortress conservation, as in the removal of existing humans and human livelihoods from areas for the sake of biodiversity. This is a fallacy and something that grew out of the creation of national parks in the United States in the 19th century, which cannot be applied all over the world and cannot be applied in this time and place where we exist today. We have to look carefully at decisions like the recommendations on having 30% of the world under protected areas. We have to ask where people live and you imply protection. What is that protection from? In many parts of Africa, this manifests on the ground as protection of areas from its residents or its custodians or its owners. And this necessitates violence, necessitates displacement, and all sorts of violations of human rights that are unacceptable in the world as we know it today. So conservation must take into account all these things and must be practiced at much higher resolution. We must remove from conservation the primitive notion that something that worked in the United States can work in Africa, and something that works in Africa can be applied in Asia, etc., etc., etc. We as experts and practitioners have to take our place at the table, and we have to be honest with governments, with international organizations, with donors, and all the people involved to make sure that what we are putting in place is not only environmentally sustainable, but politically, humanly, and socially sustainable, so that we maintain equilibrium, because equilibrium is what lasts for millennia. Fortresses only last for very short periods of time. So I look forward to discussing these things further, and I look forward to a decade that will show the way and show a departure from what we've been doing in the past that has required so much violence, that has required so much in terms of financial input, and that has created crises in many parts of our world. But we need to do this for the good of everybody. The protection of biodiversity is not for its own sake. It's never for its own sake. It's for the good of everybody. And I look forward to talking to all the participants more about this. Thank you.